In the quiet apartment complex of Clarksville, Tennessee, a horrific crime unfolded in February 2009 that would shock the community. It left investigators grappling with one of the most disturbing cases of child abuse they'd ever encountered. The victim was a 23-month-old toddler whose life was cut short by those who were supposed to protect him most. Clarksville, Tennessee sits just northwest of Nashville, a city known primarily for its proximity to Fort Campbell. This is one of the largest military installations in the United States. The town has a transient population due to the military base. At the center of this case were two individuals whose brief marriage would end in the worst way possible. Joshua Starner was a soldier stationed at Fort Campbell, a man who had served his country but whose personal life was about to take a dark and violent turn. Caitlyn Metz was the victim's mother, a young woman of just 21 years old, who made what she would later describe as the mistake of marrying too quickly. The couple had been married for only 7 weeks. Wow, I've slept longer than 7 weeks. With just 4 of those weeks spent together in Clarksville, their relationship was new, rushed, and built on what the mother would later describe as naive hopes for creating a stable two-parent household for their son. She had wanted to give her child the kind of upbringing she had been blessed with, complete with 2 loving parents working together to provide opportunities to meet the child's needs. See, the mother, Caitlyn, had moved from Oregon to Tennessee to be with her new husband, bringing her 23-month-old son from a previous relationship. The biological father had little involvement in the child's life, leaving the mother to navigate single parenthood until she met and quickly married the soldier. Her decision to marry was motivated by love for her son and a desire to provide him a father figure, but she would later admit that she had not taken time to truly get to know the man she was marrying. Joshua presented himself as someone who could fill the role of stepfather, but beneath the surface there were troubling signs that would only become apparent in hindsight. Those who knew him described him as someone who would go mudding in his truck or find somewhere in the house to retreat when he became upset, suggesting he had methods of managing his emotions that involved isolation rather than healthy communication. The victim in this case was 23-month-old Keegan Metz. By all accounts, Keegan was a typical happy toddler, but on March 7, 2007, he had been under the care of Dr. Neil Phillips at the Grants Pass Clinic in Southern Oregon since birth. Dr. Phillips remembered him as a typical child who grew appropriately and suffered the normal number of colds and ear infections most toddlers experience. The child had required tubes in his ears due to recurring infections, but this was not unusual for children his age. And during his time in Oregon, he lived with his mother, who was unmarried at the time. She was the only parent who brought him to medical appointments. Dr. Phillips never suspected any abuse or anything of that nature was going on. The mother never mentioned concerns about the child bruising too easily, and the doctor saw no indication of any medical condition that would cause excessive bruising. Those who encountered the child described him as smart, independent, and generally happy. He was in the process of potty training, a normal milestone for a child his age. He could communicate his needs through sign language when necessary and was described as being smart as hell by Joshua. The child enjoyed normal toddler activities like playing in the bathtub and watching television shows. A woman by the name of Leslie, who worked in the apartment complex office and had a son of her own, commented that she thought Keegan was cute, indicating that he made positive impressions on those who saw him. This detail is important when considering what would happen to this innocent child who had his whole life ahead of him. Now, the events leading up to February 7th, 2009 paint a picture of a household where discipline was becoming increasingly harsh and where the adults were failing to recognize the escalating danger to the child. According to statements given by both Caitlyn and Joshua, the child had been receiving for typical toddler behavior, like whining and not following directions immediately. On February the 6th, The day before the child's death, both parents visited the apartment complex office to arrange payment of utility bills. The receptionist, who worked in the front office, recalled that the couple came in during the afternoon. When she asked where little man was, referring to Keegan, both responded he was taking a nap in the apartment. They both commented on how enjoyable the weather was, presenting a normal facade that gave no indication of the violence that was being occurred behind closed doors. This interaction is significant because it shows that they were both capable of presenting themselves as normal, knowing the boy was being beaten, as if they were engaged in what would prove to be fatal abuse of the child. The fact that they left the child alone in the apartment while conducting business also suggests a pattern of leaving him unsupervised, which would become relevant to the events of the following day. The child had reportedly been spanked on the Tuesday before his death, with his mother later admitting she had noticed bruising from these incidences. The adults in the household were aware that their discipline was causing physical harm to the child, yet they continued with their abusive behavior. Now, on the morning of February 7th, 2009, it began like many others in the household. According to Caitlyn, the day started around 8 a.m. when she and Joshua became intimate. Cheeky buggers. After their sexual encounter, she went to check on her son, who was sitting up in his bed. Joshua came into the room to check if the child had soiled his underwear, which he didn't. The morning routine continued, with Keegan being directed to use his potty, which he did successfully. Both adults praised him for this accomplishment, and they spent some time in his room before returning to their own bedroom. Joshua then went downstairs to get breakfast while Caitlyn prepared cereal for the child. The child came downstairs, ate his cereal, while the adults watched television in the front room. Caitlyn described the scene as relatively normal, with the child sitting in his high chair eating and watching TV while she and her husband relaxed. After breakfast, Joshua went outside to retrieve a screwdriver from his truck, then used the downstairs bathroom while attempting to fix his hair trimmers. Caitlyn was in the kitchen preparing a blueberry pancake for the child. This is when Joshua decided he needed a haircut. Caitlyn proceeded to cut his hair very short, creating what she described as a fuzzy-wuzzy look. It was during this time that the first signs of trouble began to emerge. When Caitlyn went to remove the child from his high chair, he indicated that he needed to use the potty again. She took him to the downstairs bathroom where he urinated successfully. However, when they went upstairs so he could get him dressed, the child began to whine. The whining triggered a fatal series of events. Joshua was in the bathroom shaving his head, came into the child's room with shaving cream still on his head, and told the child, "Go to your corner, go to timeout." Caitlyn then gave the child what she described as a light spanking for his whining. The situation escalated when the child continued to whine. The mother gave him another one of these sessions, again claiming it was not hard. Joshua then sat on the child's bed and had the child stand in front of him while both adults lectured him about his whining and crying. This is important, where two adults were focused on punishing a child of only 23 months for behavior that's completely normal for that age. So, around mid-morning, Caitlyn prepared to leave for a shopping trip to the Fort Campbell commissary. She kissed Joshua goodbye and went to the child's room to kiss him goodbye as well. According to her statement, when she left, the child's bottom was red with light bruising, and his feet had some discoloration, which she attributed to him locking his knees. And this is interesting because it shows that the mother was aware of physical signs of abuse on her child's body, but chose to leave him with Joshua anyway. Her explanation for the discoloration of his feet suggests either a concerning lack of understanding about what normal childhood injuries look like, or an attempt to rationalize obvious signs of abuse. The drive to Fort Campbell took 25 minutes, and the mother spent additional time shopping. Store records showed that she checked out at 12 p.m., having spent $132 on groceries. For 2009, that is a lot. She then went to the Class 6 store next to the commissary to purchase beer before beginning driving home. During her time away, the mother attempted to call Joshua multiple times. She called him 10:38 a.m., 10:47 a.m., 11 a.m., and at 11:56. While she was shopping, she tried calling him again 12:14, 12:18, and at 12:34, and the fact that Joshua did not answer any of these calls would later become a crucial piece of evidence in understanding what was happening during her absence. According to Joshua's statement to police, the events that occurred while the mother was away would prove fatal for the child. He claimed after his wife left, he took the child out of timeout. He spent approximately 30 minutes talking to him about what he had done wrong, the whining and the crying that I mentioned previously. This lecture to a child so young suggests a fundamental misunderstanding of child development and appropriate discipline methods. Joshua stated that the child indicated through sign language he needed to urinate, so then he took him to the potty. When the child did not use the potty, Joshua decided to give him a bath because he was dirty from breakfast. He put bubbles in the bath and described the child as being happy as ever, asking where his mama was. According to Joshua's account, he left the bathroom briefly to get pajamas and a towel for the child's nap time, which was scheduled around noon. He claimed he was only gone for a minute and a half, but when he returned, he saw the child lifting himself up from the water. Joshua said the child was coughing, but he wasn't whining or crying. He then picked up the child, tapped him to help him cough, dried him off, put him to bed. He said he stayed with the child for 20 minutes. The child fell asleep, then Joshua went to have a shower himself. After his shower, he claimed he checked on the child. The child was sleeping normally. So then Joshua decided, you know what, I'll take a nap myself. But then, Joshua's asleep. He hears a loud scream. This is when Caitlyn returned home, and it indicated something was terribly wrong. When Caitlyn returned home from her shopping trip, she found a scene that would haunt her. So she comes home, she goes in, and she's going to Joshua asking him to help her with the groceries. She looks at Joshua, he's sleeping. Then she goes into Keegan's room. She called his name, he didn't respond. She called his name again, still no response. She then attempted to touch him by moving his body. She found he was completely limp. His right eye open, his left eye shut, and there was discharge coming from his eyes. He was barely breathing and was lying on his stomach. Caitlyn picked up her son and began to cry, screaming so loud. This is when Joshua ran into the room. When she told him something was wrong with the child, he told her to get her purse and keys while he called 911. Joshua's call to emergency services was frantic, with him stating, "My son is not breathing, hurry up, get here." Emergency medical services responder Jeffrey Scott Bates, he arrived to find the mother holding the child in a blanket, while Joshua was crying and dropping to his knees. When Bates looked under the blanket, he found the child was naked and in severe distress. Bates described the child as almost completely listless, but making some breathing effort. The breathing was what he called fish breathing or agonal respirations, where the child would open his mouth as if trying to breathe every several seconds and then stop. One of the child's pupils was completely dilated while the other was sluggish, indicating severe brain injury. During transport to the hospital, the child began to show some response to painful stimuli, but this response was what Bates recognized as decelerate posturing, which generally indicates a deep brain injury. This medical evidence would prove crucial in understanding the severity of the trauma the child had suffered. At Gateway Medical Center, Dr. Randall Likes treated the child and found him in severe distress. The child had been intubated with a breathing tube because medical personnel believed he would have difficulty protecting his airway due to his other injuries. The doctor worked quickly to stabilize the child so he could be transferred to Vanderbilt University Medical Center, which had better trauma capabilities. The doctor noted the child was unconscious, suffered injuries to his head, backside, and genitalia. Genitalia? What? There was significant swelling, bruising, and marks in the backside region. When the doctor spoke with Caitlyn, she told him that the child's bottom was red before she left for the store, but when she returned, she found him in severe distress. Nurse Brandy Batson, who was present when the child was brought to the emergency room, made a disturbing observation about the mother's behavior. See, when Batson asked Caitlyn where did all these marks come from, she just shrugged her shoulders and looked away. This response, or lack thereof, would become part of a pattern of concerning behavior from Caitlyn that medical staff would document. Another nurse, Melanie Mina, performed a sexual assault kit to gather evidence. She noticed Joshua recently showered and shaved his pubic hair, which limited her ability to gather evidence. But more disturbing was her observation. Joshua's conversation with her seemed very inappropriate for the position that they were in at that time. A child was almost dying. She found Joshua's demeanor different from any other male suspect she interacted with, suggesting a lack of appropriate emotional response to the situation. The child was then transferred to Vanderbilt Children's Medical Center, where he came under the care of Dr. Thomas Abramo. He was the division director of the Pediatric Emergency Department. Dr. Abramo found the child to be very sick, with critical vital signs and symptoms indicating significant brain swelling that was causing cardiovascular compromise. The child had obvious bruises and bleeding throughout his body. Dr. Abramo conducted a full evaluation and concluded the child had suffered both physical and sexual abuse. He noted significant trauma, again to the deep backside area, on his front genitalia. During his examination, he also observed what appeared to be old bruising marks that were more than 1 day old, indicating this had been ongoing. Then Dr. Curtis Wyshensky, a radiologist specializing in brain and spine injuries, read the scan taken of the child's brain. He found the brain was completely swollen, with a lack of separation between the grey and white matter. There was also blood along the surface of the brain in the subdural space. Wyshensky explained the mechanics of brain injury in small children, noting that while a child's skull can slightly expand, it's largely non-expansible. When a brain is injured and it begins to swell, it's got nowhere to go, causing pressure to increase. Eventually, if the brain continues to swell, it will be forced through the neck opening, and the pressure can increase to a point where the heart cannot force blood into the brain, starving it of oxygen. The doctor estimated that it took 6 to 8 hours for the injury to manifest. This timing would be crucial in determining when the injuries occurred and who could have been responsible. However, unfortunately, later that evening, Keegan Metz died due to all the injuries inflicted on him. His injuries were so severe that blood flow and oxygen to his brain had been cut off. Miranda Parker, an employee with the Child Protective Services, was assigned to the case. She went to Vanderbilt Children's Hospital. She photographed the child's injuries and interviewed Caitlyn. The photographs she took would become crucial in the case, showing the extensive nature of the abuse the child had suffered. The photographs revealed bruises on the child's nose and forehead, bruises to his genitalia, his inner thighs, and an abrasion again near his deep backside. Other images showed bruises on his left ear, which was swollen and red, and bruising around his right eye. Additional photographs documented bruises covering his backside. There was a bruise on his lower chin and bruising around his neck. The child's left ring finger was also reddened, possibly from trying to defend himself. Now, during her interview with Caitlyn, Parker learned additional details about the events leading up to the child's hospitalization. Caitlyn told her that when the child woke up that morning, she fed him cereal because he was potty training. He wore underpants instead of a diaper. She said she took him to the restroom and then he began whining. She put him in timeout. The mother admitted that the child was spanked several times before she left for the grocery store. She also mentioned that he had received a spanking on the Tuesday before Saturday's hospitalization, and that he had fallen out of their Jeep while the family was mudding. Parker found Caitlyn's demeanor during the interview to be concerning. She was not crying or visibly upset. She was using her cell phone to send and receive text messages. When Parker told her that the state might place the child in foster care, the mother responded, "Great, that's another thing I have to deal with now." The mother wasn't aware the child had passed away. Even more disturbing was Caitlyn's response when Parker asked if she was from Grants Pass, Oregon. She replied, "Yeah, because I'm cool that way." This flippant behavior, given the circumstances, was just inappropriate. Caitlyn then called the child's biological father to let him know what was going on. His biological father had little involvement in his life, but the father did not ask about the child's welfare or any further details. It was a short conversation. Parker found the mother's behavior so unusual that she specifically noted it in her report. She had never encountered a parent who showed such a lack of emotional response when their child was fighting for their life in a hospital. So, Detective Alan Jarvis of the police department conducted extensive interviews with the adults on the day of the incident. His investigation would reveal crucial inconsistencies and disturbing details about what happened to the child. Caitlyn provided a detailed 18-page written statement. 18 pages. I don't even have 18 friends. This statement outlined the events of February 7th, from the time she woke up until she discovered her son. She provided a minute-by-minute account of the morning's activities and became a crucial piece of evidence in the case. Detective Jarvis noted during Caitlyn's interview, she appeared more worried about her husband than the child. She repeatedly asked about what was happening with her husband and did not ask about her child until towards the end of the interview. This behavior pattern was consistent with what other professionals had observed about her inappropriate emotional responses. Now, Joshua himself was interviewed twice on February 7th, and Detective Jarvis noted he cried in both of his interviews. During the first interview, he admitted to putting the child in timeout and giving him a couple of swats for whining that day. He described the child as a smart boy, but the abuse was them just trying to work on him. Joshua's account of the bathtub incident became a central part of his defense. He claimed while the mother went to the store, he had taken the child out of timeout and talked to him for 30 minutes. This is when the child said, "I need to go and pee." Joshua takes him to the potty. The child decided, "I don't need to pee," and then he gave him a bath. According to Joshua, he put bubbles in the bath. The child was happy. He leaves the room, gets pajamas and a towel, and when he returned, he saw the child lifting his head out of water, coughing and spitting it out. Child must have been playing, is what he's trying to say. Then police asked him, okay, what about all these injuries on the child, including bruises and knots on his head and bruises on his backside? Joshua offered various explanations. He suggested that the backside bruises were from the child learning to pull up his underwear or from falling out of his Jeep. What a load of bollocks. Joshua agreed that their spankings would make the child's bottom red, but insisted they were not hard, as if that's okay. In a second interview, Jarvis informed Joshua that there was a slap mark on the child's face and asked how it occurred. He denied it was a slap mark and told the detective he would have to ask the child how he got the mark. When informed that the child's deep backside had been penetrated, yes, penetrated, the stepfather denied this had ever happened and said that he was tired of Detective Jarvis attacking him. Well, then just stop being a dirty bastard, you idiot. Dr. Adele Lewis, a forensic pathologist with the Nashville Medical Examiner's Office, performed the autopsy. Her findings would provide the most damning evidence of the horrific abuse the child had suffered before his death. Dr. Lewis determined that the cause of death was multiple blunt force injuries, and the manner of death was homicide. She found blunt force injuries all over the child's body, including his head, neck, chest, abdomen, backside, legs, and right arm. The injuries to his head were the most lethal. Wow, you've all heard the saying, no child left behind? But for these muppets, it was no body part left behind. The force required to cause the child's injuries was described as significant, equivalent to a major car wreck or falling down a building. Dr. Lewis observed bruising patterns on the child's head that were consistent with knuckles striking his forehead, indicating he had been punched by an adult. The brain swelling that ultimately took the child's life was caused by the severe head trauma. Dr. Lewis explained that when the brain swells, it has nowhere to go, so it loses blood flow and can be forced down the spinal cord, resulting in brain death. Dr. Lewis found extensive retinal hemorrhages in the child's eyes, which she explained could result from acceleration and deceleration injuries, such as when a child is forcefully shaken back and forth, back and forth. However, given all the external bruising to the child's head, these injuries could also have resulted from his head striking objects during the assault. The child had injuries to the right side of his neck that Dr. Lewis classified as petechial or pinpoint hemorrhages, which are most common when a victim is choked or strangled. His fingertips were also reddened, which could have resulted from forceful pinching from his hand striking objects, or from objects striking his hands. Fingertips. Like, that's a very specific target. Wow. Dr. Lewis noted that it would have been normal for a 23-month-old child to try to shield himself from the blows, and the injuries to his fingers were consistent with defensive wounds. The child's left ear was very swollen and red, with bruising on both front and back side. Dr. Lewis identified 3 bruise marks on the left side of his face that were consistent with slap or knuckle marks. The extensive bruising to his buttocks showed bleeding into the deep, soft tissues, indicating significant force had been used. These injuries were fresh. Most disturbing, though, was the evidence of SA. The child had a large blue-purple bruise that went completely around his deep backside, along with a tear on the edge. Dr. Lewis concluded that this injury was consistent with the child's deep backside being penetrated. Dr. Lewis testified that a child who sustained injuries as severe as this would have immediately become symptomatic in some way. The symptoms would have been obvious to any normal person, including unconsciousness, seizures, vomiting, or changing in breathing patterns. This testimony was crucial because it contradicted Joshua's claim that the child appeared normal after he came out of the bathtub. So, the trial of both adults took place several years after the child's death, with both facing charges of aggravated child abuse, first-degree felony murder committed during the perpetration of aggravated child abuse. They were also charged with aggravated child neglect, first-degree felony murder committed during the perpetration of aggravated child neglect, and aggravated rape of a child. During the trial, the prosecution presented overwhelming evidence of the systematic abuse the child had suffered. Medical experts testified about the extent of the boy's injuries. Law enforcement officers described Joshua's behavior and statements, and Child Protective Service workers detailed the concerning responses they had observed from both parents. The defense attempted to argue that the child's injuries were the result of accidents, particularly focusing on the stepfather's account of this bathtub incident. However, the medical evidence clearly contradicted these claims, showing that the injuries were far too extensive and severe to have resulted from accidental drowning or a random fall. The jury ultimately convicted Joshua of aggravated child abuse. Caitlyn received the same punishment. Now, both defendants had the opportunity to make statements on their own behalf. Joshua, who had apparently found religion during his time in custody, gave a lengthy statement maintaining his innocence while also asking for mercy. He spoke about his transformation through faith, his educational achievements in jail, and his ordination as a minister to fellow inmates. But despite his claims of innocence, Joshua asked the court to show mercy to his co-defendant, Caitlyn. His statement was verbose and self-serving, focusing more on his own spiritual journey than on taking responsibility for the death of the child. Caitlyn's statement was more emotional, describing the constant pain of losing her son and the images that replayed in her mind from the hospital. She spoke about being young and naive, admitting that her mistake was marrying too quickly without taking time to get to know her husband. What? You knew the abuse the child was receiving. Shut the fuck up. She maintained she had never harmed any of her children and never would, describing herself as a loving mother whose world revolved around her kids. So, the court sentenced Joshua to life in prison for the murder conviction. The judge found Joshua was a dangerous offender whose behavior indicated absolutely no regard for human life and no hesitation about committing a crime in which the risk to human life was high. Caitlyn received the same sentence. The judge noticed that based on character letters submitted on her behalf, he was not able to find the consecutive sentences were necessary. Hers were concurrent. Now, the psychological aspects of this case are as disturbing as the physical evidence. Joshua's behavior throughout the investigation and trial suggests a personality capable of extreme violence, while maintaining a facade of normalcy. His ability to present himself as a grieving stepfather while showing inappropriate behavior to others indicates a complex psychological profile, or as I call it, a wanker. His religious conversion in jail and lengthy statement about his spiritual transformation appear to be attempts to garner sympathy and avoid taking full responsibility for his actions. The fact that he maintained his innocence even while asking for mercy suggests either genuine delusion or calculated manipulation of the legal system. Caitlyn's psychological profile is equally troubling. Her inappropriate emotional responses throughout the crisis, from texting during the interviews about her dying child to asking about selling belongings while he was on life support, suggest either severe psychological dysfunction or just a disturbing lack of maternal instinct. Her claim again was that she was young and naive, or as I say, thick as pig shit. That may be true, but it does not excuse her failure to protect her child from obvious abuse. The fact that she admitted to noticing bruising from her own spankings, yet continued to leave the child alone with Joshua, shows a fundamental failure in her duty as a mother. But there's a final twist. Caitlyn's conviction was overturned. It was sent back for a new trial after the Court of Appeals found she was denied the effective assistance of counsel. What? The court vacated and set aside the conviction and sent the case back to Montgomery County for a new trial. Now, I've not been able to find an update since, and I cannot find her on the Tennessee Department of Corrections. What an injustice. Comment, tell me what you think.